Some of you may have heard of the Great Reset.
What's the what is the Great Reset?
Reset.
So that...
Is it a version of the New World Order? Is that what they're changing the name to?
You know how I feel about political outlooks and differences in political outlooks. I don't think it's a weakness. I think it's a strength. And I think America needs to get back to being able to have a conversation with people who don't agree. We learn so much from each other when we do that. You, I think, are going to hear and learn and question and disagree, or perhaps really agree, like very few podcasts will push you to. You're going to learn an awful lot.
A plane would have to aim north to go east in that case, but that's not what happens. And if that was the case as well, planes would have to land on runways that are moving, and that would be impossible. But how is it that you can take a flight from London to New York and it will take exactly the same time as a flight from New York to London? Yeah, one's with the spin of the planet and the other one's against it. So it doesn't make sense. You know, how do you get a breeze that goes from north to south? It just doesn't make sense. And again, science will give you calculations and esoteric ideas, but you can go out and look for yourself, and you'll see what makes sense and what doesn't. The other thing is that we have senses to be able to sense acceleration. Yeah, you get in a car and somebody puts their foot down, and you get thrown back in your seat. You can feel the acceleration. Yeah, you can feel changes, very minute changes of acceleration. Yeah. So how is it that if you live up here in Macedonia, yeah, which is spinning at maybe 700 miles an hour, yeah, because the speed it's spinning is slower than this speed. So if you took a flight down to Africa, yeah, on the equator, why don't you feel the change in acceleration? Yeah, so why don't you feel the change in acceleration? You have these senses that will register the slightest change. Yeah, but you get off the plane there and you don't feel dizzy, because now you're moving a lot faster. So no, it doesn't make sense.
Basically, technological possession and serving them 100% mind-controlled thoughts to corroborate the matrix. Organic matrix manipulation is done to targets who will not be continued to be mind-controlled. Full-time mind control relating to the mind matrix, one's own discernment is not on the table. Every process of thinking is being controlled in the second example as to not dislodge the personal psyop. I believe the synthetic matrix people talk about so much is largely perception-based.
Again, this speaks to what's going on in this country in terms of revolt. That we realize, like, all this stuff, whether you're talking about the healthcare system, whether you're talking about police reform, whether you're talking about impoverished communities, needs to be addressed. Reform of the police, reform of these communities. Like, it has to be addressed. If you're going to spend trillions of dollars to bail out these large corporations, you've got to work on these other problems too. You can't just ignore.
This might be one of the more common forms of mind control. Translating concepts into language can be controlled with technology. This is artificial intelligence based. This can also be a form of thought suppression, throwing a wrench into someone's expressive ability by not letting them properly form linguistics from concepts.
Man is absolute lord of his own person and possessions, equal to the greatest and subject to nobody. Individual rights are universal in that they apply to all human beings everywhere. Rights exist regardless of whether they are implemented in the legal constitution of a given country. and they are inalienable in that they cannot be given or taken away by any man, government, or institution. A man's natural rights are his own, against the whole world, and any infringement of them is equally a crime, whether committed by one man, calling himself a robber, or by millions, calling themselves a government. When a society and the judicial system are predicated on a deep respect for and commitment to individual rights, the individual is king, and therefore the individual is free. But when individual rights are transgressed under the pretext of public safety or the greater good, the individual turns into mere political property, which any mob or government or institution in power can oppress, detain, or eliminate if deemed necessary. As Lysander Spooner explained, there is no difference between political and chattel slavery. The former, no less than the latter, denies a man's ownership of himself in the products of his labor, and asserts that other men may own him and dispose of him and his property for their uses and at their pleasure.
There are citizens of the United States who have poured the poison of disloyalty in the very arteries of our national life, who have sought to bring the authority and good name of our government into contempt. Such creatures of passion, disloyalty, and anarchy must be crushed out. And the mission to crush out anti-capitalist ideas was in full effect as World War I began. A coalition of socialists and anarchists who had been leading the militant labor and anti-war struggle was a primary target. Over 90 IWW leaders were mass arrested and given lengthy prison sentences. Repression in the courts was reinforced by hired gangs and lynch mobs, allowed by the state to carry out vigilante actions. In 1917, the oil company-controlled newspaper Tulsa World printed on its front page, "The first step in whipping Germany is to strangle the IWWs, kill them, just as you would kill any other kind of snake." And they did kill them. In that year alone, big business's thugs, like the Pinkerton Gang, lynched many IWW leaders. Frank Little, a popular IWW leader of mine workers in Butte, Montana, was beaten, dragged behind a car, and hanged from a railroad trestle.
You're saying, I agree that we're going to have to update that because that's what's coming our way, but I don't think that's a good thing.
Well, I'm not happy about it,
Yeah.
but that's where we are.
Okay, yes, I agree with you on that.
The best parts of capitalism, free market ideology in the current era is not going to cut it.
Well, I mean, you were part of the original short list of maybe 8-10 names, and I'm wondering why and why now? Trying to have conversations with people that we clearly don't agree on an awful lot, but we have some principles in place that allow us to have decent conversations. Why the change now?
The battling ideologies of capitalism and socialism in America is more than just opposing arguments. It's been a real battle with real weapons, where one side was exiled, sent to prison, and murdered. Anti-communist paranoia continued to build. Struggles that outraged the rich, like child labor laws and women's right to vote, were labeled red plots.
Want to dictate how you live your life. It was started by a chap named Klaus Schwab, who's run what is the equivalent of the Woodstock for the super rich and super powerful, Davos, for many, many years. Davos is on now, although there are fewer private planes parked there this year than normal. And it's not because they're practicing what they preach and they've all gone green and ditched the gas guzzlers, but it's because of coronavirus. The hypocrisy of these so-called leaders jetting in to lecture about the need to take urgent action on climate change by reducing emissions is positively laughable if they weren't so serious about making you pay the price. And the problem was that too many people were starting to laugh at the preposterous climate claims, most notably about humanity only having 5 years left to live on Earth. These claims, of course, were updated every 4 years or so to kick the annihilation plan down the road. And no one, should I say, with half a brain can take them seriously anymore. So in the face of that mockery, a new plan was hatched, this time using coronavirus as the justification to make the very same changes. They've changed the title though, it's now called the Great Reset. And here is what the WEF Ubermeister has to say about it.
So in terms of changing our mindset, and here what is at the forefront is to create a new model, a new concept, a new definition of capitalism. Capitalism in the old definition comprises only financial capital, but actually human and social capital is and of course natural capital is as important as...
The Great Reset is only a new term to mask their previous failures to control economic and social foundations. The World Economic Forum is just a cabal of climate crusaders and social engineers. They think they know what is best for the rest of us. It's a veritable who's who of people you should actually be very concerned about.
When we finally stop fighting against each other, we will gain enough perspective to see the real issue here. Now, one might say that the issue is the king of the empire, the corporate elite that is enslaving humanity. But even that is thinking too small. What is the life force of this system? Is it the small group of people calling the shots at the top of the pyramid? Or is it the 7 billion strong army of people complying? That is us. That is humanity. We do it because we want to keep our jobs, because we want to survive. But we only have to struggle to survive if we comply with a system that keeps us in isolation and competition.
Corporate media receives 2/3 of their broadcast and print content from public relations and propaganda firms. It's not like all the news people are out there gathering news. They'll go cover the local wreck or what's happening at the jail. But when it comes to international policy issues, it's coming out of public relation firms, meaning that nearly all content for global capital media today is a prepackaged managed news, opinion, or entertainment. The big three global public relation firms are WPP, Omnicom, and Interpublic Group. I have a whole chapter on this. They get $35 billion a year in revenue, and they have total hegemony and they promote the total hegemony of capitalism in the world today. There can be no alternatives. Public relation firms and their corporate media partners serve corporations, the government, and non-governmental organizations in an unrelenting ideological assault and the pacification of the minds of the masses of the world. So the people living on $2 a day, they're trying to convince them to smoke cigarettes and drink Coke. I mean, and it's American tobacco. The overall messages are the encouragement of the continued acquisition of material products and consumption, expanded desires for a life of luxury, fear of others, terrorists, criminals, threatening people, the support of police states, the acceptance of permanent war on terrorism, and the equation of private corporations as an essential element of democracy. This is what Noam Chomsky called engineering opinion and parading enemies. And now, an important world policy planning group is the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is a nonprofit organization established in 1949 as an alliance from people in the countries of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The stated goal was to build policies and institutions towards collective security and peace against the Russians, ideally. That was what it was about. And they have an annual budget of $20 million, and 74% of their funds come from contributions from private grants and private corporations. The Atlantic Council produces numerous policy reports, books, and papers. The U.S. NATO military security issues are a high priority for the Atlantic Council. So this is another policy group that has 146 elite members in it that are setting the agendas for military action and security issues worldwide.
In 1918, famous American socialist and presidential candidate Eugene Debs gave a speech in Canton, Ohio. He said, "Wars throughout history have been waged for conquest and plunder. The feudal barons of the Middle Ages, the economic predecessors of the capitalists of our day, declared all wars, and their miserable serfs fought all battles, taught to revere their masters, to believe that when their masters declared war upon one another, it was their patriotic duty to fall upon one another and to cut one another's throats for the profit and glory of the lords and barons. They alone declare war, yours not to reason why, yours but to do and die. If war is right, let it be declared by the people. You, who have your lives to lose, you certainly above all others have the right to decide the momentous issue of war or peace." For these words alone, Debs was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The charge? Obstructing recruitment. Many others who did nothing but speak against the war met the same fate. Why did socialism become so strong and also so demonized and attacked at the late 19th century and early 20th century?
Well, it was really about power. The socialist movement started to arise when the ugliness of urban proletarian or bourgeois society, the working of 14, 16 hours a day, the working of children to the bone, the working of people so that they died at a tender age because they worked so long. Those kind of oppressions suffered by the modern working family, that gave rise to a socialist movement. People who said, we work all day and for what? So that the capitalists, the big robber barons can get ever richer. We want ours. And that was the beginning both of the union movement and the beginning of socialist movements, socialist newspapers, and socialist parties in the United States.
It goes through up until the 2000s. We have the dot-com bubble. The dot-com bubble is replaced by a beautiful bubble about housing. Everyone deserves a house and the American dream. Mm-hmm. But of course, it's financed by nonsense. This is called the Great Moderation by the supposed grown-ups in the room, and you start to see the cracks. You start to realize that Alan Greenspan goes from being an oracle to a guy who just doesn't even get the basics. Mm-hmm. Establishment constantly minimizes the risks, the tail risks, in favor of looking at what generally happens in markets.
Right.
But really what happens in markets is determined by extreme events. And so if you throw out the outliers, you throw out the entire story. And Nassim's point is that all of this is understandable, and that what we have is a world of financiers who, through financialization, have figured out how to get all of us, the citizenry, to act as the insurer, and they simply help themselves to the profit. In other words, we're protected up until the point it becomes everyone's problem, and then it's not our problem anymore. They always knew. And
he's saying those things at the World Economic Forum. They're not trying to hide it. Just politicians and the media.
It's not you and me investing in them unless you're in a pension plan that does a little bit of that.
But to remove the clamps of control and to let individuals make their own choices with respect to their own lives. And this is what a society structured on individual rights accomplishes. Live and let live, as the age-old adage puts it.
Well, the Rothschilds realized early on you don't make any money by lending somebody $200 to buy a used car. If you lent money to a government and they didn't repay you, then they would never get any more money. And they always needed money for wars and for to build Versailles and so forth. To be a king means you spend a lot of money. You're a big spender. And so by 1880, the Rothschilds really owned all of Europe, and they owned a large part of the United States secretly, because they always advertised and promoted the idea that the Rothschilds had no activities in the United States, and they did not. And by 1896, these two Rothschild firms, J.P. Morgan and Kuhn Loeb, owned 96% of all the railroad mileage in the United States.
Wow, talk about a monopoly there.
And that's in congressional reports. I got that right out of, most of my work, by the way, comes from congressional reports.
But totalitarianism has always been a hallmark of the leftist. They want control and power because they think they know better than you do how you should live your life. And nothing they're doing today is entirely new. It is merely cloaked in a different garb.
Exact project that Adolf Hitler assigned Himmler to do. But I was put into that job after months and months and months of psychological examinations because they knew I could keep a secret. I was given a Defense Department clearance. I knew about the Heinrich Himmler studies for Adolf Hitler, and I knew that Adolf Hitler wanted to develop some very serious people to put in places to control various regions in what he called, and George Bush called, and Nero called, the New World Order.
The business of America, what really, when we're talking about the business of America, what is the business of America? I thought it was for little businesses to be able to start and to work hard and to progress, and for a small family to be able to build themselves up and become financially successful and with morals and ethics, and everybody work for the common good. Is that the way that business is done in the government today?
Now, no, that's the myth. But we, unfortunately, you and I are talking here today about the reality. We could talk about myths all evening if we wished, but if we're going to talk about reality, then we have to say that this is a soap opera from Hollywood, the American dream. What we are facing today is the American nightmare, a wholly owned colony dictated to by aliens, in which the chance of a young person today of making it is almost nil, unless he happens to be a scion of one of the insider world order dynastic families, as George Bush was. Now, George Bush, of course, his path was smooth. He was a member of the Brotherhood of Death from Yale University. And this has all been printed in the Washington Post and many other places. So suddenly the Rockefellers said, well, it's time for the show to be over. And so Senator J. Rockefeller and David Rockefeller notified them, Clinton is the man. I want all you other people to disappear. And so Clinton came forth as #1 Rockefeller choice.
But he was bought and paid for, you're saying. You're saying that Bill Clinton himself is bought and paid for, and are you telling me that we voted for a change and the change isn't going to come to our benefit, Eustace?
Well, that reminds me of a story I heard in my small town in Virginia. And these two businessmen were talking, and one of them had a bill that he wanted to be approved in Congress. And he said, I wonder if I couldn't influence Congressman so-and-so in Washington to vote for this bill if I, you know, just bought him. And the other man said, don't be ridiculous. That's the most insulting thing I ever heard of. He said, Congressman so-and-so was bought and paid for long before he ever got to Washington.
and that's an honest congressman. Once he's bought and paid for, you know, he stays bought and paid for, I guess.
Absolutely. He goes off the block. He's no longer available.
Right. We're coming to today, and we're coming from George Bush to Bill Clinton. What do you see in the future for America for the next 10 years, Eustace Monk? This New World Order, is it taking shape, or do you think that all of a sudden we're going to come to critical mass and it's all going to disintegrate before our very eyes?
History shows that they will use whatever means are at their disposal to attain the end that they desire. They've employed the same tactics to captivate and convince others of the merits of this approach, with the end result being a disaster for all concerned.
We had World War I, we had World War II, we had South Korean War, and then we had Vietnam. Should we have fought any of those wars, Eustace Mullins? Was there a real reason? And what was the end result of us being involved in, say, World War I and World War II?
Well, John, you have to understand what wars are. Wars are carefully staged productions. Now, these are all carefully staged, and they did what they were supposed to do, and they had a good audience, and so I think they were successful. But to say that these wars were about anything, that they had some particular philosophy of government opposing another philosophy of government is total nonsense. These were world order productions, and as I say, they were carefully staged. Both sides were set up to perform in a certain manner, and the outcome was always predetermined. In other words, you were looking at a staged production which you had already seen many times, a sort of a soap opera, and you knew how it was going to come out before it even started.
It was fake. It was fake. It was absolutely fake. There's not too many people involved in this. Literally, it's a money-making scheme.
All of those people were attacked and still are attacked, if not physically in their life or through imprisonment, holding their physical body. Their memories and their ideas are attacked. All of those who are engaged in the hardcore science of understanding how capitalism works, how imperialism works, how violence and media associated with those enterprises work, and who decidedly put in their program a redistribution of goods and services and targeted the economic structures that continue to create the inequality that we still deal with. Even after death, those who are hostile to the state will be turned into, as I think Lenin called them, sycophants of the state in their afterlife, and their memories will be distorted to have them be propped up as one who would have supported what was going on, when in fact they dedicated their entire life to destroying it.
Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. Remember, individuals will not exist. It's only the collective.
High levels of the government, all the way to high levels of what we would call religious or spiritual forces. All throughout history, from the beginning of our history, our civilization, they've been putting symbols, manipulating things, basically deceiving people in a strange way as well, under the guise of angels working for God. And the stranger conclusion may be that they are the Father.
Well, let me put it another way. You're much braver than me if you entrust your future to that lot. And yet, that is what more and more governments are actually doing. They're signing on to this transparently totalitarian agenda that threatens to change our business, our social, and our educational interactions.